I'd like to welcome you to the IATF Common Audit Report application, or CARA, and remote auditing presentation. My name is Joseph Prolakowski. I am a veto power reviewer for Perry Johnson Registrars. A couple of notes for our participants today. All of you are on mute, but we absolutely want to address your questions, so please utilize the question portion of the dashboard. We will address questions at the end of the presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is whether or not the presentation will be made available after we're finished. We do make our presentations available in two key ways. Firstly, if you'd like to have a copy of the slides, those will be available for download shortly after we're finished. And if you'd like to rewatch this webinar with the voiceover, we do post all of our webinars on our YouTube page. And you can find a link for that on our website as well. Just look for the heading Previously Recorded Webinars. Our presentation is going to cover two topics. We're going to start with CARA. What is CARA and how it works, how it impacts the audit process. And then we will transition to remote auditing within the IATF standard, and how you would qualify and what some of the requirements are as far as the execution of an IATF remote audit. We'll have time for questions at the end and a few concluding remarks. So let's begin with CARA. Now, CARA is now a 2-year-old product. Its intent was to provide consistency in the completion and reporting of IATF audits. This is something that was driven primarily by the IATF OEMs for GM, Stellantis, etc. Now, the CARA format is used for all of the audit types. It's used for stage 1 audits, surveillances, special audits, and so forth. Now, in terms of understanding what CARA is, you have to understand that CARA is not a database. When you are working within CARA, you have to understand it is an audit reporting tool. And every IATF auditor, every certification body is given unique credentials to access CARA and to create content. But that content resides on the user's web browser. It does not reside on some master database. So we've had clients, for example, in the past who have said, well, I've prepared my corrective action responses in the database. And I have to very patiently explain, there is no database. You need to send those materials to us using the specified steps. And we're actually going to be going over that as part of our presentation. Now, in terms of the difference in auditing, at this point, if you are an existing IATF 16949 client, you should already have concluded that the audit itself is really no different under CARA than it was before. About the only significant difference from the auditing perspective is that now our auditors are allowed to allocate up to 15% of their on-site time for report writing. Now, previously that had been 10%. So it's a little bit more time because it is more time intensive for the auditors to prepare their reports now under the CARA system. Now, from a client perspective, probably the primary difference, the primary change, as I alluded to earlier, is going to be in responding to nonconformances. Now, previously, we had a Word file that we would prepare the nonconformances in. This would be sent back to the auditor, and then the evidence would be included as an attachment. Now, under CARA, the principles are basically the same, but the methodology has been changed. So let's go over this process step by step. Now, in an audit where nonconformances are written, you will receive your nonconformances in what's called a JSON file, a JSON file. Now, depending on the number of nonconformances that are written and depending on how you want the nonconformances shared with you, you may get a single JSON file. You may request multiple JSON files. In other words, a separate JSON for every nonconformance that's written. Now, please note that the JSON file itself cannot be opened or manipulated outside of CARA. If you get a JSON from your auditor and you double click on it, it's not going to do anything. And obviously, most of the time you can expect to get these via email. The auditor should also be able to put them in your hands prior to the closing meeting using something like a flash drive. Now, once you have that JSON file, you will need to visit the designated CARA website for IATF clients, and that is nc-cara.iatfglobaloversight.org. That is your website for preparing your response. Now, once you're on that website, you'll click on the Load Report or Backup button on the bottom row, and you'll load the JSON file that the auditor sent you. Once it's been loaded, you'll be able to respond to the nonconformances by clicking on the Edit icon. I've got the Edit icon highlighted here on the right-hand side. It looks a little bit like a pencil. Now, once you've clicked the Edit button, you'll be able to review the auditor's nonconformance. You'll be able to see the statement, the evidence, the requirement that they're citing. It's important that you read all of that. Now, obviously, your auditor has already gone over all of that with you in the closing meeting, but it's important that you re-review it just to be very sure that all the information in the nonconformance is accurate. Now, if there is some issue with the nonconformance as written, definitely get back with your auditor and let them know, hey, these details aren't quite right, or we need these clarified. Now, if you and the auditor are at an impasse on the merits of the nonconformance, you can file a dispute. But bear in mind, you have only 15 days to file a dispute from the conclusion of the audit. Now, assuming that you understand and agree with the nonconformance, you will then prepare your response. And I'm going to take you now through the various parts that you would fill in. The first one is referred to as correction containment. Now, you have to specify what the timing is going to be on this and who's responsible. Now, this portion includes your extent analysis. And the intent here is that you're going to address the item that was cited in the evidence by the auditor. So in other words, if the auditor says that there were 2 people that were missing their training records, under correction and containment, it should indicate at minimum that those training records have been created and that you've confirmed no other training records are missing. Under evidence of implementation, this is to be a reference to any related document numbers, etc., that apply to the correction. So in other words, you've stated what your correction containment is, but under the evidence box, you need to tell us, okay, what have you provided us to back up what you've said you've done? Bear in mind, of course, in an IATF nonconformance, you have to provide evidence for all of the remediation steps that you take. Now, this is not the actual evidence items themselves. This is not an attachment field. This is a description field. And the intent, of course, is to expedite the auditor's ease of review of these items. Now, I'll show you in a couple of slides here where you will be attaching the evidence pieces. Now, to continue on, we have a space to record both a root cause analysis and a root cause result. Now you'll note that these are two distinct items. Root cause analysis is, this is a new item, and it's to be thought of as the investigation of the cause, the analysis of the cause. Some folks will follow a 5Y protocol, some folks will use a fishbone analysis, etc. This is to be captured under the root cause analysis field on the CARA form. And if you've got files to back up that analysis, those should be provided as well. That's optional. When you get down to root cause result, this is the final established cause or causes. It is possible that you'll have multiple causes for the cited issue. And again, if there is a particular support file that goes with it, that can also be provided. From there, of course, you transition to corrective action. And under systemic corrective action, again, you're going to indicate who's responsible, what the timing is going to be, and you should be able to explain the evidence that's been provided to support the implementation of the corrective action. Obviously, in IATF 16949, the expectation is that you will have fully implemented your corrective action. That is, of course, the requirement as specified in Rules 5th edition. Now, lastly, I want to highlight the evidence of implementation files. Now, anything that you've specified under the evidence of implementation statements, you need to provide a tangible piece of evidence to support it. Now, the CARA system only supports upload of JPEG and PDF files. These are the only two file types that you can upload and attach to a CARA response. However, if you have additional evidence pieces, if you have a Word file, an Excel file, etc., that cannot be uploaded to CARA, these should be provided to your auditor via email or through some other appropriate means. Now, those items still need to be described under evidence of implementation. You need to explain to us everything that you've provided to support the steps that you've indicated you've taken to address the nonconformance. Now, the final part of the nonconformance pertains to verification of effective implementation. This should be used to describe any verification steps, whether that's an internal audit or a layered process audit or some other steps to verify the effectiveness of your corrective actions, and then any supporting evidence that can be provided to substantiate that verification. Now, once you've provided the full response, you will use the Save NCs for Auditor field to create your own JSON and send it to the auditor for their review and approval. Now, we recommend that you also prepare a PDF using the Print Report button, as highlighted here, for your own records. Now, as you are preparing your response, there are multiple mandatory fields, all of the items we've talked about earlier. And the easiest way to spot those is to look for the red outlined box. I've given you an example below here. When you're preparing your response, look to see, are there any red line boxes where I have not provided content? Because we have to have all of those things filled in if we are to accept your response. Now, once it's in PJR's hands, it will pass through a two-stage review process. The auditor will review the responses, and then a veto power reviewer, like myself, will also review the responses. Now, understand, it is possible for either one of us to reject the response that you've prepared. If that is the case, we will prepare a set of comments on why the response was rejected. And I've provided an example here. We do try to be as detailed as we possibly can and try to set you up for success so that when you prepare a revised response, you will be able to have it be approved then that second time around. And again, this will be sent back to you via a JSON file, in this case, an updated JSON file. Now, after things have received their final approval, you should expect to receive a finalized JSON file showing the approval for your records. Now, some of our clients have asked us, are we allowed to use our own corrective action forms for preparing our responses? Unfortunately, we cannot accept your own paperwork for the official documentation of the response. You can certainly use it internally for developing your response, but in terms of what you turn over to Perry Johnson, we need you to use the CARA format. That is specified by the IATF itself. Now, if you'd like to learn further about the CARA system and how it impacts you, the IATF has developed a wiki information page with some further details and some videos. I've provided the link on screen here. I've also developed a couple of training videos that walk you through the basic steps of interfacing with CARA. And those URLs are provided here as well. I'll go ahead and leave this screen up for just a couple extra seconds if anybody wants to take a screenshot. Again, we will be providing these slides after we are finished here. Okay. So with that in mind, let's transition to remote auditing. Now, the remote auditing within IATF 16949, obviously, this came about as a result of the pandemic, and the policies related to the remote auditing are still housed in the IATF COVID memo, which the formal title for that is the Global Waivers and Measures in Response to the Coronavirus Pandemic. Now, that is a public domain document. You can find it on the IATF website, which I provided the URL on screen here. So I'll be referring to that document through the rest of my presentation as the COVID memo. Now, just to give you a heads up, there is a revision coming. We're expecting to get it sometime next year to the IATF rules that's going to provide some further insight into remote auditing policies. To put it very plainly, you can expect remote auditing to be a part of IATF 16949 auditing permanently, but certainly with a lot of restrictions and regulations associated with it. So I don't have any further details than that at the present time, but I can tell you that it's coming. So obviously, when we get word of Rule 6th edition being published, you can definitely expect a webinar and other formal announcements from Perry Johnson at that time. So in terms of can any client qualify for a remote audit? As the COVID memo is the only regulation we have to follow, officially, the only justification for an audit going remote is if it is demonstrably evident that a regular on-site audit will not be possible for reasons directly linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we have received anecdotal feedback that the IATF is taking a harder look at these requests in recent witness audits. In other words, if a client is claiming we need the audit to go remote because of COVID, and then we are finding out, for example, that you've had customer visitors or things of this nature, the IATF is starting to take action in those situations and saying you really shouldn't have approved this audit to go remotely based on the evidence that we're seeing during this audit. So again, their preference is for an on-site audit wherever possible, wherever feasible. The requests for remote truly have to be based on COVID reasoning. Now, if you want a remote audit, what you need to do is reach out to your scheduler, your PGR scheduler, and request a remote audit, and you will be sent a document. You'll be sent a form called the F108 ICT IATF. This is our IATF remote audit questionnaire. Now, this form is intended to make sure that PGR meets all of the requirements from the COVID memo, as well as the requirements related to remote audit planning. Now, in section 1.3 of the COVID memo, it talks about a standard documented agreement between PGR and the client. And this COVID form, this remote audit questionnaire, is intended to help us gather what we need for that standard documented agreement. So let's go over what's on the form. Now, the first page of the form requires the respondent to provide a rationale as to why the remote audit is being requested. So we've tried to provide you with some sample verbiage, things like government travel restrictions, recent positive cases for COVID-19. It could be that you're requesting that a sales office be looked at remotely. We've had some feedback from the IATF that remote auditing of a sales office, a design office, etc., these can potentially be approved for reasons other than COVID, for it being an administrative office and so forth. Now, as of right now, we have to file for a special waiver in those situations. It's our expectation that when Rule 6th edition is published, some of that special consideration will be written right into the rules itself. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more streamlined at that time. Now, the rest of the F108 ICT IATF falls under eligibility. And the eligibility questions begin with software and hardware. We need to know what software you're intending to use. Now, we can provide GoToMeeting, but if it's your preference that we use something else, we need you to tell us what it is. It's going to be Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Skype for Business, etc. That needs to be spelled out on the form. Also, whatever hardware you specify, whether it is computers or tablets or cell phones, we need to be assured that this is going to be sufficiently broad that it will cover all areas intended for remote assessment. So if it's just a sales office, for example, well then personal computers with webcams are probably going to be just fine. But if it is to include manufacturing, unless you're planning to haul a laptop around your production floor, we're going to need you to go into some more detail on how the production floor portion of the audit is to be supported. And you'll note that that needs to include Wi-Fi and cellular coverage so that the auditor can audit in real time. Photographs and so forth, these are not permitted. It needs to be real time, auditor eyes on the auditee, on the records and so forth, as close to a recreation of the on-site experience as possible. Now, we also inquire about your ability to support a remote audit beyond the hardware and software. So we ask questions about, are you maintaining your records electronically? If some of them are not electronic, you have the ability to very quickly scan them for auditor review. We need to know if you're going to be actively manufacturing your product. Obviously, if there is a production shutdown that is going to take place or whatnot, that's going to factor into the planning of the audit. Questions 5 through 10 all relate to critical information so that we can plan our audit. Let's go over what these items are. Questions 5 through 7 pertain to situations where you experienced a shutdown due to COVID-19. Now, at this point, there are very few of these, if any, still occurring, but if it has happened, we need to know how long you were shut down and for what duration, and what your startup verification protocols were. We need to know if it was necessary for you to enact any special or extraordinary measures. Did you have to outsource any manufacturing? Did you lose any resources, whether temporarily or permanently? Have you made any special changes to your day-to-day protocols and how you do business? Now, in question 11, we require that you appoint what's referred to as an audit coordinator. Now, this is a very specific designation. It's actually mentioned in the COVID memo itself. And it states as follows: the coordinator is going to manage connections, availability of auditees, and will manage the technical issues throughout the entire audit. It may be necessary to have more than one coordinator, especially if there is more than one auditor, with parallel audits being conducted. Now, the COVID memo then goes on to say, the certification body shall ensure that the audit team maintains full control of the audit and discussion to ensure that the coordinator is not responding for auditees. Now, in general, this audit coordinator can be anybody, and it may very well be the person who is the guide during the audit. But bear in mind, they are responsible for the technological aspects as well. Under question 12, you are asked if you are willing to participate in a technology test session. This is also specified by the COVID memo, where it states that a successful technology test session needs to be done for all environments, facilities, and locations planned for the audit, including the use of a mock audit test. Now, this needs to include all areas of the manufacturing floor and shall include contingencies, recognizing that some specific individuals may not be needed during the audit due to contingencies. Now, the memo specifies that that test needs to be done between the client and the audit team, not the client and PJR. Now, the final portion of the F108 ICT IATF gives you a place to provide a list of your automotive customers and to let us know if they are operational or not. And again, this is geared towards audit planning purposes. There's two things that are mentioned in the F108 ICT IATF that we should spend a couple of extra minutes on. And I'd like to begin with the audit coordinator. Now, this is someone who, as I mentioned, they need to be reasonably versed in the technical aspects of the remote interface. So in other words, they need to know what they're doing with the remote interface software, someone who knows what they're doing with Skype for Business or Microsoft Teams or whichever software we're using, someone who knows their way around the device, someone who can troubleshoot the laptop or troubleshoot the phone or whatever it is we're using to ensure communication. And at the same time, they need to be strictly a coordinator. In other words, the auditor needs to lead the interviews and let the interviewees answer for themselves. Obviously, the auditor maintains control of the audit at all times. Additionally, the technology test session. I've kind of highlighted this here so that it's very plain. This needs to cover everything, all the support locations, all the production areas, all the administrative areas, etc. we need to have reasonable assurance that the remote audit is going to be successful. And it needs to occur outside of the actual audit process, preferably days before, if possible. Now, if some part of the remote audit process does not work, if we lose connection for multiple hours or whatnot, there are a couple of protocols we can follow. If it happens to be a surveillance assessment, we can potentially add time to the next regularly scheduled audit. Now, if it happens to be a stage 2 or a recertification audit, in all likelihood, we're going to be performing a supplemental assessment to make up the difference in lost audit time. Now, if you are not comfortable with a remote audit or can't support it, if you have strictly hard copy records and so forth, previously we were in a position to delay audits. Unfortunately, we are no longer able to do so. So in other words, your audit has to go on time per the requirements of IATF Rules 5th edition, or you risk losing your certification. So if you are in a situation where you have multiple COVID cases, you must go remotely. If you are in a circumstance with multiple hard copy records, you may need to look at transitioning at least some of those records to a virtual medium as part of your preparation for the audit. Now, I want to assure you we are a tenured provider of remote audits. We have been since March of 2020. At this point, we've done well in excess of 1,000 remote audits. And if you'd like to learn more about our remote audit process, we do have a whole separate webinar for that entitled Virtual Audits, explaining PGR's approach and expectations. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of our other webinars. We have a well-received webinar about the interaction of processes and its importance to a successful audit. We show that one on a semi-annual basis. And we have webinars on a wide variety of other topics, Stage 1 auditing, ISO 9001, and so forth. If you'd like to be kept informed of the latest news automatically, the best way for you to do that is to visit our website at www.pgr.com. Go to the bottom of the page, enter your email address in the provided space, and click subscribe. You will be opted in for updates on changes to the standards, upcoming webinars, and other points of information. I do thank you for your time and attention. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard if anybody has any questions for me today. Okay, well, thank you all so much. Wishing you a great day and take care. Oh, hold on, we have a question coming. John Lamping is asking, can you retain recordings of remote audits? In terms of PJR does not retain recordings of the audit process. I do believe it is permitted for you to retain a recording of your audit if you have the auditor's express permission. That would have to be discussed with the auditor in advance. And Lisa Ekanaka, yes, these slides will be available for download shortly. You'll just need to review our website. There is a link for downloading the slides. Okay, thank you all. Have a great day.